You know, if you're adapting some of Tolkien's work and you end up with something that's a slower pace than the actual Lord of the Rings books, then you might have a problem.
He's almost there. Any minute now. 2 hours later.
The torch is lit. Let the race begin.
Greetings, fellow mortals. Just a reminder saying It's Just My Opinion is for cowards. When I first started watching Rings of Power Season 2, I decided to not constantly compare it to what Tolkien would have wanted. Now, you might be thinking, but love of storytelling, that's a fair comparison. They're stamping Lord of the Rings all over the place. And you would be right, but I can't do that all of the time because I would lose my mind. Comparing the Rings of Power to Tolkien's work would be like going to Las Vegas with the Bible and trying to critique everything around you using the scripture. I don't think that's going to work out well for you. Where do you even begin? The only way to get through an episode of Rings of Power is to throw all of Tolkien's work away and assume that this is an alternate universe or an original creation from someone else. Not in terms of looks, in terms of all the little inconsistencies that keep popping up. Just like with Shadow of Mordor. You just have to assume, hey, this isn't actually Lord of the Rings and move on. It's either high budget fanfiction or something that was obviously inspired by the Lord of the Rings. You have to separate the books from the show, and if you can't do that, there is no possible way for anyone to enjoy the Rings of Power. And the weird thing is that Amazon could have avoided all of the backlash if they just said, hey, this is inspired by The Lord of the Rings, instead of saying that it's a direct prequel to The Hobbit and the trilogy. Of course, if they actually said that this wasn't directly tied into Lord of the Rings, then no one would have watched. So, there you go.
There's a catch. A catch? Sure, catch 22. Anyone who wants to get out of combat isn't really crazy, so I can't ground him.
But to be fair, I'm going to start with the biggest positive that Rings of Power has, and that is how it looks. This is the single prettiest show that I have ever seen. Middle-earth is absolutely stunning, and the magic is really fun to watch. All of the outfits look like they were pulled straight from the books, and all of the different species from the halflings to the dwarves to the elves were great as well. And the orcs too, I gotta give them that. You can see where all of the overflated budget went. If you did a montage of all of the different locations with calming music in the background, that would be the perfect screensaver. And another positive is that everything is basically coherent. It's almost impossible to get confused about what's happening. Making an outline would be very simple to do. I barely remember anything from Rings of Power Season 1, but I still skipped the recap and I was not lost at all. So this is a very easy show just to sit down and randomly watch without thinking, because it looks good and it's easy to follow. If you don't want to think a whole lot or be challenged after work and you just want to sit down and be distracted, here you go, you got what you need. And if people enjoy the show for that reason, I can understand. There are plenty of video games that I play because I want to do something while I'm listening to an audiobook or a podcast. It is a perfect 5 to 6 out of 10 experience. Perfectly average, perfectly palatable, perfectly mediocre. That's what Rings of Power is. It is the absolutely stunning distraction to get you through the final day until the weekend. That's why it comes out on a Thursday. It's the most okay thing I've seen all year, and whether or not you like that or not is up to you.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next products.
But people that are big fans of Tolkien's work probably will have an issue with it. The biggest issue is the pacing. I could read the entirety of the Fellowship of the Rings in the time that it would take to watch every episode of one season of Rings of Power. And I'm not the fastest reader in the world, especially with Tolkien's work, because I get distracted by how beautiful his prose is. It's absolutely phenomenal. Seriously, just study how he structures a sentence. It's amazing. And admittedly, there are plenty of times in Fellowship of the Rings alone where they just randomly go frolicking through the woods. It does not build up the story all that much. And there is a character named Tom Bombadil that doesn't appear in the movies despite being in the books. But they did that for a reason. They had to fit a lot of content into one film. When you're adapting a written work onto a screen, there does have to be some changes because there can't be long internal monologues and giant descriptions of the surrounding area and what people are thinking and feeling. And there can't be, admittedly, giant distractions that don't fit into the overarching story because you're on film. There is only so much time that you have. It's why there's not a whole lot of people that are upset that Tom wasn't in the films. He just doesn't fit into a different medium, and that's okay. Everyone realizes that the Lord of the Rings movies tried to be as faithful as possible, but they also had to be movies with strict time restraints. They had to keep things moving. They cramped as much content as they could into the shortest time frame possible. And the Rings of Power is the complete opposite. They draw everything out for as long as possible. Each episode is about an hour long, and there is only enough story in there for 20 to 30 minutes. As someone who has watched a lot of anime, I'm pretty much used to padding, especially in shonen. There's about 11 minutes worth of content in some episodes, but they each have to be at least 22 minutes, all the while saving as much money as possible. So there's going to be a lot of pauses and there's going to be a lot of flashbacks. That 11 minutes can get pretty frustrating, but guess what? It's still 11 minutes in comparison to 30 to 40 minutes. What are you doing? Please hurry up.
Charlie, you're going to have to get your crutch quicker. Yeah. I'm gonna show you what you did. Like, you know you next, we already did. Give me Scott, give me Charlie. Yeah, Scott got to come all the way over here to meet your old ass.
Every single establishing shot takes about 5 to 10 seconds longer than it should, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when it happens 50 times, it starts to add up. There are so many times when things just stop and the camera just stares at the characters. And the dialogue, oh my god, the dialogue. It's not like it's poorly written or anything. It's the most okay thing ever, which you could argue could be an issue because this is an adaptation of Tolkien's work and nothing that he wrote was just okay. No, the issue is the 3 Mississippi second pauses. I noticed it during the first episode of season 2. I thought I was going crazy there for a while, because I noticed that almost every single time it was someone else's turn to talk, there would be a 3 Mississippi count in between when someone else started speaking. My wife did not believe me at first, but then I started doing it. When someone was done talking, I would go 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and the next character would start talking right as I finished the count. It happens all of the time. If you had a drinking game for this phenomenon, you would die of alcohol poisoning in 20 minutes. I get that they were trying to buy as much time as possible for each episode, but it felt like every time someone was talking, I was listening to an Obama speech. And this isn't even a criticism of the man himself. I know that it's not his fault. Like all of the actors, he received poor direction. I want to go to see all of the university professors that told him to slow down his speaking pattern and slap them all across the face.
Larry, what the hell are you doing?
Larry!
Larry, you can't just... Oh,
Larry! Oh.
Speaking of poor direction, what is with the direction of everyone's facial expressions? For 95% of the cast, there are only 3 different types of faces that they will make. Their eyes will widen, their lips will part, or they will give someone a side glance. What is this Wendigo type of acting? I despise it. Every 20 minutes or so, there would be one other expression. I'd be like, oh look, someone's smiling, isn't that nice? The only exceptions are Sauron sometimes and the dwarves. It got to the point where I just wanted a story about the dwarves because they're the only ones who react and talk like real people. Because of the pauses, the generic dialogue, and the lack of facial expressions, I can't anchor on to anyone. I can't bring myself to care about them. We know what's going to happen, meaning the plot is completely thrown out the window because this is a prequel. Let's compare this to the greatest prequel ever made, Better Call Saul. They knew that we knew what was going to happen. So instead of trying to make a very intricate plot, they made you care about the characters. And I can't bring myself to care about all of these boring people who make stupid decisions. Seriously, the only reason the plot continues to happen is because everyone constantly makes poor decisions that aren't thought out at all and aren't consistent with the characters. And then for people to get out of trouble, something random has to occur in order to save them. What phenomenal writing that is. For the first 4 episodes, there's not a whole lot to say. Not a lot happens. Things aren't very consistent with Tolkien's universe. The things that are happening are palatable and things are pretty, but it's just so boring. Almost everyone is so stupid and inconsistent. Their minds change so quickly that they're not the same people they were 5 minutes ago. It is the most stale bread 5 out of 10 experience that I can think of. They need that Lord of the Ring branding, because if they didn't, no one would care at all. Just like the Hobbit movies, and you never want to be compared to the Hobbit movies. And oh my god, there's still a month of this. Everyone remember House of the Dragon, where everyone said that it was boring, not a lot of things happened, everyone was talking? Well, guess what? I had things in perspective. I knew that it could get a lot worse. But what do you think? Am I completely off base here? Are you enjoying Rings of Power Season 2? If so, please leave a comment explaining why, because I'm very curious. And remember, if you disagree with all of this, that's fine. After all, everyone is entitled to their objectively wrong opinion.
What the hell was that?
Thank you all so much for watching.
Still here?
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. You bye. Boom.
Do not despair.